We now have a configuration form that works in the way that people would expect it to. The one thing we're not doing yet, though, is actually using this value for anything. So that's what we'll do next. Now, if you didn't follow along with the last parts of the video and you're just jumping in right now, you can go to the resource pack. I'm going to hop over there now. And you can copy step 34, Trails Menu Links YAML, adding link to admin index page, rename it to Trails Menu Links YAML, and put it in the base directory, and skip over having to watch or re-watch the previous videos. So our next goal is trying to figure out how to use this value inside of the block configuration form. So right now, when we edit one of our Trails blocks, I'm going to go ahead and go to the block layout section. I hit structure and then block layout. And if we add a Trails block, I'm going to click on Trails history here. We're not going to see any input that allows us to select the number of items to show in this block. That's because we're not adjusting this configuration form at all. But we saw by copying the Powered by Drupal block where that adjustment should go. So if we go back to our files and we go to the Trails history block.php file, again, that's in our source folder under plugin block, and we scroll down to the bottom to our build configuration form method, this is where that would happen, right between where we generate the form initially and where we return the form. In the Powered by Drupal block, it didn't really do anything to add additional inputs, it just adjusted inputs that were there already. So what we want to do is find an example of a configuration form where we're adding new inputs. So let's check out the code base for examples of build configuration form. I'm going to copy build configuration form plus the parenthesis here, and I'll search the code base for it. Okay, so we're looking for a definition of build configuration form, and here's the first one that we can see. I'm going to open this up, and if we look at this, there's a lot going on, but at some point you can see that we're adding new items to the form. And this is really what we wanted to see in action. So it looks like we can just add it right in, and then at the very end, return the form, just like we're doing now. So kind of the interesting thing about this is that this isn't a block plugin, assign owner node.php. It clearly doesn't have anything to do with blocks. However, it still defines this build configuration form. Now, knowing what we know about blocks and plugins, maybe we would think that this is also a plugin, and possibly plugins share the same configuration form syntax. And if that's what you're thinking, you'd be right. But we can kind of validate that. We don't just have to guess. So if we look here at build configuration form, you can see that it's inheriting from a parent class. Actually, it's an interface, and you can see here in the yellow overlay, it says implements method in the interface plugin form interface. Now that's a generic interface for plugins. So this should work for our blocks just as well as it works for whatever type of plugin this is. So if you've been feeling at all a little bit wary about this idea that there are all these different types of plugins and what are you supposed to do with plugins in general, this is one sort of example of how sharing a common interface across all plugins can be useful. They're all using the same way to adjust configuration forms for those plugins. It allows us to learn how to do it once and apply it across all different types of plugins, whereas in previous versions of Drupal, you'd have to relearn that for each type of component that Drupal uses. So this is actually pretty neat. Okay, so we have an example now. Let's back up now and look at what we're doing in our actual .module file that we pulled in from our Drupal 7 version. So I'm going to go back to the Trails module, and I'm going to open up Trails.module. I'm going to close out this search down here. And we're going to scroll until we find the configure item here. Okay, so this is the hook that we would use, hook block configure in Drupal 7, in order to adjust the configuration form for a block. So what we're going to do is copy this code and go to our Trails history block and paste it in here inside of our build configuration form. Now we know right away that we're going to have to adjust some things here. And the first thing is this variable get. Now this max to display is what we're setting in our settings form for the module, so we should be able to just go to that form and actually copy this default value and use that directly. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to jump back to our Trails history block, and I'm going to paste this in. Now if I undo this and you see we were setting a default to 50 before, but now if you remember, we already have a default set automatically when our module is installed. It's pulling from a configuration YAML file in order to get that default. So we'll always have a default, and we don't need to set it every time we pull in this configuration. All right, and now we're seeing T, and I kind of want to take a look at this assign owner node where we were looking at an example to see if it's using T as well. It is, so we'll go ahead and follow suit there. In some cases, we're going to use this T, this, and then an arrow T, but in this case, it seems like using T is all right. So I'm going to go back to Trails History block,